let's get started. So the prompt is just general reactions to the article. And if you can explain any difficult bits that you clicked through and looked at for the benefit of other people. So let's see. Why don't we start today with Ben and go up?
All right. Well, I'm actually, so if you look at the first picture, the Ethereum Swarm Whisper thing, I'm actually old enough, or was involved in the space for long enough to remember when that was the big thing in like 2016, 2017. And, in truth, I am kind of disappointed how, well, this vision sort of fell apart when sort of, everyone focused on Ethereum. And Swarm and Whisper, I mean, I guess they still somewhat exist, sort of fell by the wayside. We never got the whole, you have file as sort of the whole full stack that was supposed to be, peer-to-peer intermediated, or at least, contract enabled. So, you have the secure comms, you would be downloading, files from your peers. And then, this would be incentivized by Ethereum, so you could, host on Swarm and get money, or at least be rewarded that way, the same way, stakers can work. So this actually, it makes me a bit nostalgic. As for, because, everyone started focusing on Ethereum, and then, the other two fell by the wayside. And it turned out, to be fair, they were, at least with Swarm, was a lot harder than people thought it was going to be. There was Filecoin, and that, turned out to be a big fiasco as well. So I can see why one of the three legs of the stool was more difficult, but I was always disappointed that, the comms got dropped off. I think encrypted comms is, for all people who deal with like Ethereum and Bitcoin and stuff, it's surprising how little they tend to care about encrypted comms, at least, in a more secure than WhatsApp or Telegram sort of way. And Telegram's really not great. So, I'm glad to see that this bubbling up again. Otherwise, because, I'm pretty well acquainted with all this stuff. Most of this makes sense. I mean, some of the stuff I'm not too familiar with. Like, I didn't hear about Railway or Nocturne as privacy solutions. A lot of this stuff I think is very Ethereum specific. Like account abstraction is how Ethereum is trying to solve particular problems that are based on how they built the EVM to only sort of, only externally owned accounts can generate transactions. And they really want, contracts to be able to generate transactions effectively. And, I have also some, critiques of how Ethereum has, evolved in this point. In like the way I would, and I don't want to turn this into a long discussion of me complaining about Ethereum, because I could go on complaining about Ethereum for a while if you wanted. Not that I don't love Ethereum. I love Ethereum. I just, I'm close enough to it that I can see some of its flaws. And one of the ones that still irks me is, you remember, last year there was, 2 years now, there was the merge. And as part of the merge, they really wanted to have a multi-client system as opposed to Bitcoin, which basically just has Bitcoin Core. And I want you to, I'll drop a link after I'm done battle-upling. I'm not sure how many of you have actually downloaded and run Bitcoin Core, but I would highly recommend you do it just for the experience. You'll see that one, it's if you download it as an executable, like, this is 10, 20 years ago. It's just an executable file. You download it, it just runs. It runs smoothly in all the cases I've had. I've never had any crashes or problems. You can set it up to sort of run at the start, and you can just run it, and it works. And it sort of just does the thing where, hey, it just works, and you don't have to think about it. Now, it does take a long time to sync, but once you get through that, it's sort of there. Ethereum went through the trouble of making like a 4x4 set of clients, so 4 execution clients, 4 beacon chain consensus clients, and all of them are these command line kind of pain in the ass to use. You have to mix and match. They all have their own guides, they made sure that all 16 pairs, are at least operational. But it's like none of them are easy. None of them are as easy as you double click on the executable and then you have the Ethereum, like the way Bitcoin Core works. And it felt like this is such an Ethereum thing to do, where they put all the extra effort to get like 4 of these things that all are basically the same. Yes, they're written in different languages or whatever, but from the user's perspective, they're all equally difficult to use. When maybe you could have had 3, and then maybe something that looks like Bitcoin Core, like maybe it's double click and you get the Ethereum. After it syncs or whatever, and yeah, Ethereum's fatter than Bitcoin, but it's not that much fatter. Anyway, I just could go into it for a very long time, and I'm sure that there's like more individual things. So if anyone has any questions, like, hey, what's this thing? I'll try to explain it. Anyway, I hopefully that was at least not completely pointless.
I guess it's me next. Uh, yeah. So like,
Yeah.
uh, so I had not. I just started exploring Ethereum technically, and the only like my information about the crypto world was like reading what we did here. So basically this is what was an informative post for me, like what was the initial idea and what were the things happening. So that way this was really good, and then like I didn't even know about the other two legs of the stool, what Ben said, like what was there in the original vision. But yeah, like he, I think like the problem I see is that like the financialization of the entire thing with Ethereum, and then like everybody is there just for like where the money is, and the other two are basically not getting enough attention because of that. And yeah, I think the problem in like it didn't happen in internet is because like in the it I think the internet started in around 1969, and then it was in like a incubation for like 20 years, and then the financial things started happening on top of it. And for Ethereum it was just like 5 6 years, and then all the attention has been on Ethereum and not on the other two parts. Yeah, that is what I got from this article. I'll pass it on to Anant.
Yeah, thank you, Anuj. Yeah, I mean, like you, I'm also like relatively new entrant to this uh, blockchain world, specifically the Ethereum world. And reading this, uh, one that struck me as the sort of like it's talked last year around hyper complexity. It seems like there's a lot going on in this article, and there's a lot of uh, uh, different aspects of Ethereum that sort of was. Uh, I mean, it was quite dense, is what my initial reaction was. And this whole make Ethereum or eat cypherpunk again sounds like a sort of cry from the old internet age era, like in the 90s, like the declaration of cyberspace independence. Or I found a similar a cypherpunk's manifesto was also published from there in 1983. So it seems like this was like these types of manifestos are sort of call to action type things. Uh, does seem to work, but it clearly takes a long time to play. Reading especially the John Perry Barlow's again, I was just reading it today, and sort of 30 years later, a lot of things that he said in discussing the article, especially in terms of democratizing access to information and just sort of information not being or information space being immune to the sort of traditional sovereign boundaries. It did happen, and I can speak with personal anecdotes on that, but a lot of it didn't happen. So I wonder how this will play out. That's what kept going in my head. The other thing that sort of struck me, specifically in terms of thinking about the evolution of the internet, since Ethereum, in some sense, wants to be uh, or at least supposed to be a set of like open internet protocols or like built on top of other open internet protocols, was that it seems like a lot of the early other internet companies had some sort of like a model to go after, uh, besides the open, very bare open communication standards like TCP/IP, the other sort of applications that were built on top add like a model of like a VC funding it, just the previous paradigm of funding such endeavors and sort of allowing those companies to grow. It's not clear to me on how. It's not clear if the same model still applies here or like what model still applies. So I thought that was interesting. Especially in the crypto world, it does seem on the technical level, like it seems like it's protocols all the way up and down, and specifically protocols that are cryptographically secured and using crypto economics for security and for other reasons. It seems the freedom, independence from financialization is almost impossible unless there is some centralization in the mix that can sort of subsidize the access. I mean, I'm not quite definitely with account abstraction, but it seems account abstraction is like a way for sponsoring transactions via the paymaster or like transaction bundler. It seems like a kind of centralization subsidy that would make it easy to onboard users to different kinds of application. So it makes me wonder if maybe centralization is not all that bad, and it's like a matter of which trust assumptions that we are willing to compromise on. Especially like when I think of like other bringing, I mean, EF talks about bringing like another billion users into this, so it sort of reminded me of this conversation we had here. I think in the I forget which particular paper it was, but it was along the lines of one of the events of the week was resisting in the right places, and if you go by the definition of like we here would be, but if the sort of true crypto natives are the ones that that can both technically and otherwise be motivated enough to be able to use these systems, they sort of have to like lay the foundations for like normies to use on top of like itself from that category. So yeah, and I mean, lastly, the sort of one of my pet peeves is, especially every time Vitalik publishes something like this, is sort of the ripple effect it creates in the ecosystem on sort of the values, especially exposed, gets pushed to the extremes, and it often gets and it loses all the rational and reasoning. So I really like that he sort of linked this article on the concave and convex thinking, in which is I think he points it to like sort of the saddle point seems to be like an optimum middle, so instead of being either full concave or full convex, somewhere in between seems to be the reasonable point of view to have, but often that doesn't happen, especially when it produces something like this. I thought this is my bit on the social layer on all these things, but I wish like more like kind of the crypto influencer, and I know that a lot of other Ethereum researchers think real work, but they don't often have time to publish their serious thinking on this. And one more thing that sort of, I think one of the articles that was linked in the thing that I thought was interesting was like thinking about Ethereum as making resistant to World War III. I thought that was like a good intuition to have to think about how these systems need to evolve. And also, like one more last thing that I had noted on was isn't that he made with regards to traditional stacks and decentralized stacks. I thought that was while useful, but I thought it could be limiting because it seems what the have with Ethereum and what it enables is like quite different from what the previous traditional stack used to have or like can do. So again, it could be one of the things that could get twisted in downstream of this. But I think there was interesting to point out. And the other one that I thought that was kind of odd was the low. Like you mentioned that for replacing the traditional banking rails with the sort of crypto rates, like we still need loans from the banks. I thought that was kind of hard, especially like maybe we may not be able to do like most credit needs the economy with something like this. But the point of all these sort of decentralizing financial settlements is to sort of have on-chain attested like business reputation layer. It could potentially be like a signal for accessing global pool of capital, especially for businesses in sort of developing countries. With this kind of rollups already in play, it could be possible, but we all that call out that specifically on that. But I'll stop there. I'll pass it to Venkat.
Yeah, I think this was a good vision resetting attempt for 2023 because we've now been through, I guess, 6 or 7 cycles since about 2013 or so. And each time, I think this thinking has gotten a little more sophisticated. And I think one of the key points that Vitalik makes is the big impressive thing about the Ethereum ecosystem is that it takes social incentives seriously. And what looks like a bug often from outside, which is, at the boom periods, the degens take over and profit is the only thing that matters at high transaction rates. It creates this sort of like weird cycle where through the years, for half the periods in the up cycles, there's nothing you can do except like sit back and watch the degens chase profits. But for the other half of the cycles, you can actually work on building things that are basically impossible in most other tech ecosystems. In other tech ecosystems, things like, just even getting people to use key pairs becomes kind of impossible at scale because compared to like traditional passwords, the extra inconvenience is just high enough that nobody uses it, nobody learns to use it, and so it remains this kind of like cool toy pod project on the sidelines, and these people calling themselves cypherpunks, treating it as like almost a cool exclusivity feature of their subculture. There's almost a lack of social ambition, I would say. So this is kind of something I've been thinking about, which is unlike proper social revolutionaries, people who get very political and turn into communists or libertarians or whatever, tech people kind of like always start with tech. And it's a question of like, are you only interested in tech or are at least interested in tech plus a little bit social? I think the right sort of like orientation around this stuff is your center of gravity should in fact be social, but then you should actually have like a, I don't know, ton of like technology as a marginal interest, and nobody actually does that. So all the political people who are like super ideological, they seem to kind of hate technology, so they try to create like big change purely through political means and social means. And on the other hand, the tech people are a little too nerd sniped by tech itself, so that they think that what they need is a focus on tech plus like 10% focus on social. Neither is perfect, but if I had to pick one, I'd pick the latter. But just flagging that really cypherpunk is the wrong level to shoot for. And it's sort of like a dissonance within the article, because what Vitalik is describing, which is millions of people at scale using sort of like these dark forest Ninja Turtle type technologies, that's not quite cypherpunk. Cypherpunk is like a lower scale, kind of like techno hipster kind of subculture. So we need a better name for whatever this is, which is mass adoption of relatively sophisticated technologies with high political and social potential. And I think the thought experiment of like being prepared for World War III is kind of interesting, and it kind of sheds a different light on the key sort of like technical feature that Ben pointed out, which is if you compare even within the crypto ecosystem, Ethereum is a lot more inconvenient than Bitcoin. Like the light clients idea still hasn't come anywhere close to reality, and trying to use an Ethereum client is like a mess. Like I remember the first time I tried to download and run one in 2017, I just gave up. And instead, I just used a web wallet, moved everything to a centralized exchange and dealt with it there. So, yeah. But if you ask, why is that the case? And you ask, is this like some fundamental property of technology? And you compare to, say, industrial age technology, it's a certain problem emerges. Like take something like airplanes. Like if you were around when the Wright brothers were inventing the first airplane, you would be dealing with a technology that you would have to be like a true hacker to use. The technology itself would be very simple, but the features that you did need to master would be life or death. Like it was a tiny, very primitive plane, and you would need to know how to fly it, but if you got it wrong, it would crash, right? And today's state of the art is take a modern airliner, like a Boeing airliner. These things are so big. There's a factoid I like to remember that the length of a modern airliner is greater than the runway length of the original Wright Flyer. So a Wright Flyer could actually take off and land. The entire first flight of the first Wright Flyer could happen inside a modern airliner. That's how big these planes are. But none of us ever sees any of that complexity. Like you have to master hundreds more details than the original Wright brothers had to fly on a plane, but none of those details are life or death, right? You need to know how to print out a boarding pass. You need to know how to get through security. You need to know that you cannot carry water through security. You need to know like a million things to go on a plane trip today, but none of them are life or death. Even the pilots who are doing the skilled job, they have to know a million things, but fewer of them are life or death because so much of it is automated and the autopilot takes care of most of it these days. Like the pilots are almost barely needed. And in fact, quite often when the pilots do intervene, they cause dangerous situations and crashes, right? So that's the evolution of a normal technology. It is simple, but mostly like life or death, and gets to extremely complicated, but mostly not life or death. And along the way, it gets both complicated and extremely safe. So if you apply this logic to cryptocurrency, you can see that Bitcoin and Bitcoin has kind of stayed at the Wright Flyer level. So yes, you can download Bitcoin Core and run it, but it's basically not trying to move beyond that. And they've turned it almost into a religious value to stay at that level. Whereas Ethereum is getting the complexity, but the safety and non-criticality isn't actually increasing at the same rate. So maybe this is transient. Until about the 1940s, airplanes were not super safe. Like so the airliner safety really started increasing only after World War II. Before that, it was not a very safe means of travel. But so maybe it's just a historical thing. But part of me also thinks about maybe it's not just tech evolution or historical stage thing. Maybe it's the nature of the application of the technology, which is that it's both social and technological, and it's meant for things like post-nation state infrastructure and post-World War III stuff. And maybe Bitcoin and Ethereum represent two different strategies to being World War III resilient, which is Bitcoin assumes that the world is the World War III is unstoppable and everything will be bombed to apocalypse. And therefore, you have to rely on the absolute minimum technology that you can expect to survive, which might be, a whole bunch of simple, primitive junkyard computers. So you have to be able to run Bitcoin nodes on them. And everything has to be like the absolute simplest possible. And everybody has to be able to deal with life or death level mastery of simple technology. So this is basically a Mad Max vision of the crypto future, which I don't like. Like if that's the world Bitcoin is planning for, I'd rather not invest in that world. Ethereum, on the other hand, I think is hoping for a wholesale replacement of all sort of like social political infrastructure. And this seems unrealistic in another way because nation states and their entire infrastructure are like really, really old and complex. They have like evolved. Even the most modern version is 400 years old, which is the Westphalian state. But even beyond that, lots of pieces of the social infrastructure, political infrastructure goes back like 2,000, 4,000 years, right? And Ethereum, if you look at the table of features and things that Vitalik has laid out, it's kind of the rudiments of can we do without nation states altogether, but not be in a bombed out post-apocalyptic Mad Max world? Can we have something at least slightly resembling the kind of world we have, maybe a lot more inconvenient, but it exists without the need for the old political infrastructure? And in that sense, in its own way, it's equally unrealistic, and I don't want to invest in that either. But again, push come to shove, and I have to pick one, it seems like the better thing to bet on. If you're going to choose between two unrealistic things, you might as well pick the one that might be more pleasant to live in if it comes about. So overall, yeah, I think this was good and necessary sort of vision article. I don't entirely agree with it, and I think there's a few fundamental flaws in it. But it's kind of the right conversation to be having at this time, especially as a new boom seems to be kicking off. So sorry for going on for a little length. Jenna?
Sure, it can be quick. I am the ELI 5 on the team. And one of my takeaways is just how much vocab you've got to learn if you want to play in this space. And I'm having flashbacks to the biology course I had in college, which took away all of the fun of learning about, biology is really cool, but they turned it into such a slog, and it was mostly about learning the lingo. So with that in mind, I'm like, well, I want to keep enjoying this vocab project. And then I think the main other thing, a bunch of notes, but I think the main other thing, two other things I would mention is three other things. One is I really appreciated Anant mentioned the concave piece. I also went snuck over there. The saddle points thing felt really true, interesting. The concave convex spread. The other piece that I clicked through on that seems important to remember in this is the revenue evil curve piece that he linked to. And that, Megan, you mentioned all this, so I won't go into it, but that we have to appreciate the energy that the DGen folks brought to this space. And so it's not about stopping them altogether. And then, the cyclic, maybe when they're riding high, everybody else goes quiet. And when they go quiet, it's a chance to build. So that's a neat dialectic in here. And then the last piece I will emphasize or just reinforce is the because of all this lingo and how complicated all the under the hood stuff is. You're right. Airplane analogy seemed right for me. So how to make it, I'm okay on brains, but I still can barely follow the real. The Vitalik can roll all this up into a piece is pretty cool. So if I can skate along, catching some of it, I'm pretty happy. And then, but if I show any of these pieces, once in a while I show one of these to like a friend who's not following this space. And of course, they have no idea what any of it means. So I've said this before, I appreciate this Monday call as a safe way to follow along for what might be real and good and useful in all of this. Because a lot of the people I follow, of course, are just completely hateful on the whole crypto space. I think those are my main downloads. Oh, I know there's a table that he showed in terms of projects that this group might do this year. Any one of them tackling one of the projects in the list that he made, the traditional stack versus the decentralized stack, I'd be up for any experiments along those lines. So I think then it's Grigori. Hey, Grigori, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to everybody. I'm kind of disappointed with this article, but it makes me wonder. From the get-go, the author, Vitalik, is trying to remind himself that they are, Vitalik and Ethereum Foundation, are not here to just create isolated tools and games, but rather build holistically toward a more free and open society and economy. I wonder why this reminder is even needed. It looks like it should be obvious, probably. By the way, even the foundation is structured, that they're not just making tools and games. They're doing something different. something more holistic. And the whole, I don't know, path, trajectory of the Ethereum Foundation is kind of toward creating something more holistic. But suddenly the founder says that he has to remind himself the obvious thing. So if it reflects something, most probably it reflects the psychological state of the founder. And it's quite interesting. So this is one point. Another point is a little bit later on, he has a list of values. And in this list of values, quite interestingly, he has next to the last item saying that we are building tools, not empires. Empires try to capture and trap the user inside a walled garden. Tools do their task, but otherwise interoperate with a wider open ecosystem. And again, it's kind of make me think, he stated a little bit earlier, one page earlier, to be exact, that they are not creating isolated tools, and then he lists the values, and he states that they do create tools and not walled gardens, not the holistic thing, not the empire. And again, it's quite interesting why this contradiction even pops up. It should be resolved already for a long time. They should be quite certain what are they doing. Are they doing tools, or are they building an empire, a holistic system? And it's unclear from the text what they're actually doing. Finally, I agree with almost everybody who says that the beginning of the piece feels a little bit nostalgic. But again, it looks a little bit unnatural to me because they kind of want to go back in time, but to keep all the cool tools and cool technologies, so all the baggage that they picked along the way. So they want to go back on point zero, but with all the tools, which suggests that somehow they don't like the choices they made along the way. So they accumulated some interesting technologies, but something went wrong probably. And they're on a wrong trajectory, or they feel that they're on a wrong trajectory. And that's why they want to go to the point zero. And in my view, it's kind of impossible. Probably this train has already left the station. They are what they are at the moment, and going back is not going to help them. So that might take, and I'm returning it back to Venkat probably, because I'm the last one on the list.
All right, few more minutes. Any second round comments?
I mean, this is sort of a comment on what I said when I wrote earlier about cryptographic keys. I forget who brought it up first. And you know, I think it is part of the article where it comes down to the fact that crypto has got people to actually give themselves a public and private key pair for all that's worth. Getting hacked, losing it. I feel that it's, and I don't want to. This shouldn't take too long. I don't want to. It's not just that, not just for like finance, just sending and receiving coins or whatever. Obviously, you need a public and private key pair to do encrypted messaging, and that's always been a very hard problem from getting an actual encrypted messenger that's really end to end and it's easy to use and so on. And And one of the biggest critiques I see of the space is, oh, people will never do that. People will never have their own private keys. It'll never be secure. You'll never be able to have them handle you. There's always going to have to be, someone you can email and then get it reset, which ultimately, undermines not just, the crypto space, but the whole idea of everyone can have their own keys. And I feel like the sort of the challenge for the next century is actually going to get people to, be able to get people to use their own keys in a way that normal humans really can do. Mediocre, not being Superman and memorizing, 24 words magically. And I think that is sort of like the deep challenge, because I don't see any other situation where people don't have at least some recourse to their own keys. And like I said, not just in finance, but in, the sort of whole idea. And I always feel like it, and I want to make that, I started blabbling on this because I wanted to make this analogy, is if you imagine 300 years ago, arguing with a royalist, well, of course, the people will do their voting, they'll have their democratic institutions, they'll be able to vote in a democracy, and be like, come on, the peasants are idiots. They will never learn anything about, how states and societies work. They'll always be terrible voters. The idea that, the average person will be able to meaningfully vote in a society is ridiculous. It all comes down to making sure you have the right nobility. And I always feel like that's the analogy to, like, people can't own their own keys, is like, people will never, it always come down to some royalty who controls the keys. And you're all just trying to get that well done. And obviously, democracy isn't perfect. And a lot of the critiques of, like, some of this democracy is, it doesn't, sometimes people aren't voting very well. And, it certainly hasn't created a utopia. But I do think, it's better than having a royal caste. Even, as flawed it is right now in, like, say, the U.S., where we almost like, have a royalty. It's just, in money. But even with all that, individuals voting is good. So I think, like, I think the problem is solvable. And I think, that is sort of the right way to view it. Anyway, I've eaten up all the time. I'll see if anyone else wants to say anything.
About
Couple more minutes.
Ben's comment, maybe it's a social thing. So when people lose their actual physical wallets, they generally don't expect it back, or if it has been, like, stolen. But if it's like a digital account, people have a social, like, or an expectation that it can be restored. I don't know if it will change or not.
Well, I think the interesting challenge is that there are systems, and I think he talks about social recovery, but I think it's much deeper than that, where you can try to get, you lose your keys, you can try to get them back. And there are, like, systems to do that aren't just, your keys are actually owned by someone else. And I think the actual exploration and, refinement of that technology is going to be very important in the next century. Getting it to the point where people can actually have keys and lose them, as people want to do, and then not get totally owned, is going to be sort of the interesting, sort of, I think, fundamental technical challenge that not only undergirds crypto, but a lot of other stuff.
So this would actually be an interesting sort of, like, anthropological thing to look at, which is physical keys, by which I mean physical lock-in keys made out of, like, metal. What the sort of, like, risk profile of that is when people lose their physical keys. In what percentage of cases does somebody find them and return them, or they go looking where it's been dropped and find them again, versus having to pick the lock or break the door down? Because those last two options are not available with digital private keys, and that's kind of an interesting difference. And I'm curious about what social difference it makes, because it sort of, like, changes the sociology as well. Because since you can't pick the lock or break down the door, your only option is, in fact, having, like, multiple spares lying around with neighbors, effectively, which is what counter abstraction tries to do. So yeah. So there's some interesting analogy. Same thing with wallets. Like, you drop your wallet, somebody might return it, but if it Actually, wallets is a better analogy than keys, because if you lose currency in a place that nobody's likely to find it, or if they find it, they can't return it to you because maybe your address is not in your wallet, then it truly is lost the same way online crypto funds are. So yeah, I think it's worth thinking about the precise metaphors here. Anyway, 9 o'clock, so we'll pick this up again next week. And my plan for the next few months is to alternate a crypto issue reading with non-crypto reading. So we'll continue this exploration of like 2023 to 2024 state of crypto conditions, along with other general distributed systems readings. And we'll circle back on like our summary review stuff like we did the last couple of weeks, and maybe do something with that. I'm not yet sure what. All right, see you guys next week, I guess.